A light and pastoral novel in contrast to her other works, British author Elizabeth von Arnim's historical fiction The Enchanted April, 1922, was inspired by her travels along the Italian Riviera. The story weaves together the lives of four distinctive women in contemporary England who, somewhat reluctantly, decide to vacation in Italy. As they discover shared experiences, the women arrive at a moral realization. It is wiser to seek social connection rather than exclusivity. Renowned for being an early work featuring a bond of women as central characters, the novel paved the way for later feminist literature in Britain. It explores themes of self-fulfillment, love, the intrinsic value of nature, and the texture of memory. The Enchanted April begins on an ordinary day in England, where Mrs. Arbuthnot, a reserved and traditional woman, meets the more spontaneous Mrs. Wilkins to discuss an advertisement for a villa rental in Italy for the following April. Although they see each other as mere acquaintances, Mrs. Wilkins perceives Mrs. Arbuthnot's dissatisfaction with life and urges her to sign the lease together. After contacting the villa's owner, Mr. Briggs, who becomes infatuated with her, they realize the cost is higher than anticipated and decide to find two other women to share the expense. Their search leads them to Mrs. Fisher, a controlling woman, and the wealthy Lady Caroline Denston. Despite their initial reservations, Mrs. Arbuthnot and Mrs. Wilkins agree to include them. The two pairs travel to Italy separately, with Mrs. Arbuthnot and Mrs. Wilkins arriving last and discovering that Mrs. Fisher and Lady Caroline have claimed the villa's best rooms. Captivated by the beauty of Italy, Mrs. Wilkins forgets her minor troubles, while Mrs. Arbuthnot feels guilty for not informing her husband of her journey. As the vacation unfolds, the four women learn more about themselves and each other. Mrs. Wilkins, enchanted by the Italian countryside, invites her lawyer husband to join them, hoping for a resolution to her marital issues. Mrs. Arbuthnot, motivated by guilt, does the same. Meanwhile, Mrs. Fisher reflects on her repressed youthful spirit and resolves to nurture it, while Lady Caroline contemplates how her life has been cheapened by trivial pursuits, though she struggles to find a more meaningful path. Mr. Wilkins arrives at the villa, eager to gain business from the wealthy women. Despite his career focus, he comes to appreciate Mrs. Wilkins for pulling him out of his comfort zone. Lady Caroline rebuffs him, seeing him as just another man after her fortune, while Mrs. Fisher befriends him, enjoying her time with both him and his wife. Mr. Briggs stops by the villa on his way to Rome, momentarily forgetting Mrs. Arbuthnot when he sees Lady Caroline. Although she initially ignores him, she eventually softens, recognizing his genuine affection. The plot takes an unexpected turn when Lady Caroline invites a lover from England, who turns out to be Mr. Arbuthnot. Before Mr. Arbuthnot can register his shock, Mrs. Arbuthnot joyfully welcomes him. Lady Caroline quickly shifts her attention back to Mr. Briggs as Mrs. Arbuthnot reconnects with her husband. The story concludes with the women preparing to return to England after their month in Italy, eager to integrate their newfound self-understanding and improved relationships into their daily lives. The Enchanted April is a gentle novel, even amid its twists and turns, presenting an idealized rural Italy as a backdrop for reconnecting with one's spiritual roots. By employing the trope of a change of scenery as a therapeutic device, it suggests that the social bonds fostered by nature and relaxation can offer relief from the pressures of modern urban life. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and be sure to subscribe. Thank you.